What's up everybody, NFX here with another tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to talk about filters and how what they are, and basically they're part of the what I'll call the EQ or equalization family. And what a filter does is it basically takes frequencies in an audio signal and does something with them. It either allows them to pass, blocks them out, or a combination of the two. In order to talk about EQ and filters, first we need to be able to understand what it is we're talking about with regards to a frequency spectrum. Okay, so what you see on the screen is a parametric EQ. It's basically just the standard one that's built into FL Studio, but all parametric EQs are very similar to this one. And what we're looking at is a series of faders or sliders that allow us to control different points in the spectrum. Now the spectrum you can see down here in this rectangle, that's the representation of the spectrum in a graphical way. And basically what it does is it takes low frequencies and displays them on this end, and then as frequencies get higher it displays them going from the left to the right. The vertical bars here, 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 there, and there are where these various sliders are set. And we can see by the numbers underneath the sliders where they are in the spectrum. And you can see down here this one's at 90 Hertz. Hertz is basically how many cycles per second a sound at that frequency would make. So we have low frequencies, and then you can see the frequencies get higher as we move up the scale. Now we can set these to whatever we want. So technically this slider, you can see where it's controlling down in this area. You can see where it's controlling the item, but we can actually move that wherever we wanted on the slider. But let's just think of it right now as this. So the frequency spectrum is this graphic down here. This is a way you can picture it in your mind when you're thinking about EQ and where frequencies are. Lower end is things like kick drums, bass, maybe some lower strings like cellos, things like that. Mid-range is where like vocals and guitar might dominate. And then you have your high end, which is where like maybe your hi-hats and your cymbals and maybe flutes and high-pitched instruments basically do most of their living up in that area. And when we're talking about filters, what we're talking about is either removing or allowing to pass various frequencies. So in order to demonstrate that, I want to talk about 4 common types of filters. And to do that, I'm going to basically draw a graphical representation of them so that you can see what it is visually and then hopefully get a better understanding for it. Now what I'm doing here is I'm basically setting the filter type right here. And you can see how that curves, and this curve in the little picture looks very much like this curve down here. And that's what I want. And basically I can control this drop by turning this knob and setting its frequency. And this kind of a filter is actually known as a high pass filter, because what it's doing is it's cutting off everything down here in this area. It's just cutting it out, and then everything above it's letting it through. So that's why it's called a high pass. It's letting the high frequencies pass. And let me get something playing so we can hear what that sounds like. I have a loop, a sample loop that I'm going to play, and I'm just going to let it repeat. And let me start it. Okay, so in this loop we can hear the strings. I can hear a bass line. Hopefully you guys can too. Sometimes the video will reduce the quality of the audio so that sometimes the low frequencies don't come through, but I'm trying to encode them a little bit differently now. Anyway, so I can hear these various frequencies. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply the high pass and see what happens to it. So you can see here I'm going to start cutting off frequencies below this mark. Now what you should be hearing are the strings and maybe some of the drums in the background, but the strings are pretty much dominant in there and the bass line is non-existent. And that's because we've cut the bass out. The bass lives in the lower frequencies and we've applied this filter to cut that out. So that's known as a high pass filter. You'll often see it referenced as HP. So if I disable this parametric EQ for a minute, I'm going to bring up the channel settings for this loop. And in FL Studio, the channel settings have a built-in filter, which is very convenient to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look here for HP, that's high pass. And now I need to set the cutoff frequency. So when you saw me over here sweeping this frequency, basically that's the same thing as this cut knob here, which is cutoff. So you can see with it all the way over to the right, it's similar to this being set something probably like this, approximately. And as I sweep this knob over, it starts to cut off the low frequencies and let the high frequencies pass through. Now this parametric EQ is not active right now. I'm just doing it for display purposes only. Okay, so that's a high pass filter. So let's disable the filter for a moment. Let's go back like this. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to enable this filter again, but this time instead of a high pass, I'm going to do what's called a low pass, which is this one. And you can see now the shape of this has changed, and now it's allowing sound on the lower end to pass through, and it's cutting all the sound from the higher end. And if I start off the loop again, and then I'm going to sweep this down so you can hear the effect of it. So here goes the sweep. So now you can hear that the strings are almost entirely gone, but the bass line is still there. I'll turn it up just a little. So that's called a low pass because it's letting the low frequencies pass through and it's cutting out the high frequencies. Okay, so now I'm going to disable that EQ. Now I'm bringing up the channel settings and I'm going to show you basically where the equivalent of that is over here. And there's actually a few of them here. There's fast LP, LP, LP times 2, SVF LP, and SVF LP times 2. And these are different filter types, and I can't explain to you what they are because I don't know, other than the LP means low pass. So in this case, if I do, let's say this one, SVF LP times 2, and now again, here's the cutoff, and right now it's allowing everything to cut off because it's similar to this one being set all the way over like this to the right. And as I sweep this down, it's going to be like me sweeping this one down. And you're going to hear more of the high frequencies get removed. Okay, so now you can hear the bass lines playing, but you really can't hear the drums or anything else. And these filters actually work a lot better than trying to do them with the parametric EQ. So if you have the opportunity to use the filter here in the channel settings, it's better if you try that first before you go to the parametric EQ. Now this particular technique, I've heard it referred to as the low-end theory, and I don't know if that's really the proper name or just someone named it that and thinking that's what it was called or not. But what I do know is that this is a very common technique that people who sample use to isolate a bass line. And by using this technique, then it allows them to play basically the sample's bass line without all the rest of the sample in the way. You know, and it's useful for parts where they just want to keep the groove going, but they don't want, you know, the strings on top, or they want to do a breakdown or something where only the bass is playing, or maybe the bass and drums are playing or something like that. They'll filter it this way to get that to happen. Okay, so now let me turn that off. And now we're going to talk about another type. So the next type I want to talk about is here. And this type, and you can see on the screen here how it kind of dips in. This type is called a notch filter. And the reason why is because it kind of notches out a piece in the middle. Or, in other words, it lets some low and some high frequency pass through. Now one thing I didn't mention up until this point was there's another setting which controls how wide this particular curve is. So I can go like this and make it very narrow, or I can open it up and make it very wide. And you're going to have to experiment to see what works best and whatever you're working with. But in this case, let me turn on the EQ, because remember it's not on yet. So I'm going to turn it on and you'll hear the sample will change a little. I'm going to turn up the sample. Here we go. It was a very subtle change there, but I'm going to sweep it up and down the dial so you can hear the difference. Now, this particular type of filter is often used to remove or isolate very specific frequency. For example, I can hear, and I hope it comes through in the video, I can hear a kick drum. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. I can hear a little kick drum in the background. But using this type of filter, I can go to where that area of the kick drum is and try to remove it. And actually I'm more successful at removing the bass line right here. You can hear the bass line is gone, but it still has some of the low frequencies and it's got a lot of the high frequencies in it. So this is often used, like I said, just to remove very specific parts of the frequency. Maybe you want to try to remove some of the something that lives in the middle, something like maybe the strings. You know, the strings are pretty dominant. It'll be hard to remove them, but let's try anyway. No, they're almost impossible to remove, but there they've been minimized quite a bit. And that's what this type of filter, it's called a notch filter. And I'm going to turn that EQ off, and then I'm going to go back to the channel settings, and I'm going to try to show you here where we're at. There it is, notch. So now again, this is the same thing. We can sweep our cut, And this res is actually the same thing as the width setting that we used over on this side. It basically opens or widens or narrows that particular dip or frequency range. So now I can try to do the same thing here. And if I make it kind of wide, it's probably going to be easier. So there I've cut some of the bass out. And you can hear the sweep is a lot more dramatic using this filter than it was when I used the EQ, because this is really filtering it a lot better than EQ, but sometimes you might want to use the EQ to get finer control. Okay, so there's the notch filter, and then the last type of filter I want to show you guys is something called the band pass filter. And let me turn that off again. Go back here and find the proper setting. There it is. Now a band pass filter is basically the opposite of a notch filter. And what that means is it's going to let a certain band of frequencies pass, but cut out the rest. So you can see it kind of looks here like a mountain. And when I activate this, I've just activated the EQ that you're looking at. And you can see, again, this has a width, or often called res or Q. So I can make it kind of like a triangle, kind of like a hill, a big round thing, or like, you know, Mount Fuji. And again, as I sweep this up and down the dial, you can hear how it isolates only those items that live within the frequency, within that mountain. And I can make it very narrow, like this. I can make it very wide. And again, this can be used for just bringing out a certain part of the sample. Now, one thing that this one does that's kind of nice is if you use it right, you can get a real spacey sound out of the sample. So I could use it like with this setting, for example, and I can still hear the strings playing in that sample. But now they kind of sound a little more in the back, maybe a little lo-fi. You know, and they've kind of got this different feel to them all of a sudden. And by the way, this is also the same type of filter that gets used when you're doing, like, you want a voice that sounds like it's on a telephone. You would use a similar filter to a band pass, and you would let a lot of mid-range frequencies through and cut the high and cut the lows completely out. Let me turn off this EQ and let's go look at what that is like in the channel settings. So over here in the channel settings, we can see there's BP, and that stands for band pass. And it's the same thing. And then there's our res, which, remember, that's the width. So that's very narrow. That's wide. And we can sweep it up and down the dial, and you can hear the difference. Now you can get very creative with samples, and it would not be, let me turn that off for a second, it would not be unusual for you to take a sample and play the same sample but have it filtered different ways. So for example, here's my loop. I can clone this. Now I've got it twice, and then I'll take the first loop on top and actually, where is that? Go and do a low pass on it. Let me play that. and get the bass line out of it, kind of like this. Okay, then I can go to the other loop and do the opposite. Or maybe I'll do a bandpass or something, but I'll basically try to take out the bass from it. So I'm going to do, let's say, a bandpass. Right there. So now there I don't hear the bass. I'm going to add it in with my other one. There they go. But see, now I have greater control, because if I want to turn off the strings, I just mute this channel, and now I've muted off the string. So from the one loop, I have a bass and I have a string. See, like that. And then if I add my drums into the mix, I have a drum pattern off that you can't see, or you won't see, but I'm going to add that in. So now I can mix them together, and I want to drop out the strings. They're going to drop out when it loops. There it goes. Here comes the strings again. Ready? So there you go. And that's filtering. Hopefully you learn a few tricks that you didn't know. And as usual, this is NFX saying I will catch you guys in the next tutorial.